Hello, my name is Ian Rattray, and welcome to the first of the Friends of American Old Time Music and Dance podcasts. In this issue, we'll be looking back at Gainsborough 2020. So without further ado, let's kick off with an interview with Tim Rook, who gives us some background to the festival and Friends of American Old Time Music and Dance.
It was started by a chap called Keith Johnson 27 years ago. Keith was a banjo player, more I think of a bluegrass player, and he went to some music group in Birmingham, I think it was. Keith lived in Gainsborough, and he was surprised that he met up with several musicians, banjo players mainly, who lived very close to him that he didn't know about. So he started what is now FOAOTMAD as a little gathering of fellow musicians, which then, after 12 months, they formed an association. Guy Tucker was the chairman, and Keith was secretary. And they had their first festival in Gainsborough, it would have been 26 years ago this year. And every year it's gone on from then. And it's still held in Gainsborough because, although Keith has now unfortunately died, because it's where it started, we keep that tradition going by renting a school in Gainsborough and having our festival there.
Tim told me about how he became involved with FOAOTMAD and how he goes about organising the festival.
I play a double bass. Sue and I, that's my wife, Sue and I, we used to dance for an Appalachian clog dancing team. We danced for over 20 years with them. So I've been involved with old-time music because we used to dance to old-time music songs. And we went to Gainsborough before I was a member of FOAOTMAD. I joined in 2011, and we went to Gainsborough Festival, I think about 2010, with Mark Wallace and Georgie Laws. And we enjoyed it so much that we decided to join, and we continued to go to the festival. I think we missed a couple of years. And the reason I got involved was that at the 2014 festival, Nick Pilley announced that he would be retiring as festival organiser. And at the AGM, they were asking for people to, if there was anybody wanted to take over the job. Nobody said anything. I didn't say anything at the time. And I thought about it for about 20 minutes, and then I went and approached Andrew Henley, who was the then chairman, and said, I'd been involved in the folk world for some time. I'd been helping to run a ceilidh for a long time. I'd organised a couple of weekend events, so I said I would give it a go. And years later, I'm still doing it. Choosing the right artists. We try to... It's always been tradition that they have people from America, artists from America come. And it's quite difficult to select a band or individuals that want to come over who, although are well known, don't come to the UK very often. People like Bruce Molsky is over here, 2 or 3 times a year, so people get a chance to see him. Well, other groups, they may not get a chance to see, and Gainsborough is the only time they can have that chance. I have no problem with English bands because I've usually got them knocking on my door wanting to come to Gainsborough, such as the popularity of it. Again, I have to be a little bit careful. We try not to repeat the same band 2 or 3 years running. I also try to bring in the odd unknown band who I've listened to and who I think will be good for Gainsborough. It helps to give them a start in life, I suppose. One of the things I do since I took over the festival is to add a bit of variety each year, not necessarily intentionally, but this is the way it's worked. I was reminded once very strongly that the D in FOAOTMAD stands for dance, so I took notice of that, and I think we have satisfied that person and a lot of others by including a lot more dance into it. And there was a slight risk, if you call it a risk this year, was to have the South Carolina broadcasters, who are more bluegrass than old time. But again, they went down extremely well.
Headlining on Friday evening was Emily Schaad, a fiddle player from Asheville, North Carolina. I started by asking Emily about her background and how she got into old-time music.
I grew up playing music. I grew up playing classical music and learned violin from when I was 5 years old. And so I always had an identity as a musician. And I really felt holed in terms of only being able to speak that one language of reading music and playing kind of in a more prescribed setting. And I still love it very much. I'm a classical musician by trade. I'm an orchestra conductor and a violist. And as I was going through high school and college, I remember really wanting to play old traditional music. And I didn't really know any language for it or how to find it. And I think in retrospect, I could have just like gone to a store and bought some records. But I didn't. That's not somehow what happened. You know, my mother was a violinist too, and she kind of followed my journey, learning how to play. And we used to buy books of fiddle tunes and like try to play them and I would always think, oh, that's not really right. And so eventually, I found my way to Ashokan music and dance camps, and in upstate New York, which is very close to where I grew up. And so I went to a week-long camp and took workshops, and I just fell in love with it. I can remember driving in to the camp with my windows down and hearing, hearing the sound we hear here, with the banjos and the fiddles. And there's kind of like a thrum, it was like moving up and down like this. And it really got my heart. I was like, oh, that's the sound. That's what I have been looking for. And as much as I love the sound, I think it was eventually really the community that drew me in more, and this idea that you could play a music that was a social music. It's a type of music that, the point is to play. The point is not to necessarily perform, and it's to enjoy other people socially and musically, and that's kind of what makes the music keep going, and that's what makes it special. I think that from the beginning, for me, it almost felt like a foreign language. And, the thrill of kind of learning a language and then finally being able to have a conversation with somebody and, like, understanding it to the point where you can be, like, converse, even if it's a tiny bit. It's like there's a magic there that, like, feels foreign to you. It feels like you're borrowing from somebody else's or experiencing somebody else's culture in a way that's allows you to, for a second, feel like an insider. And I think for me, the music was like that in the beginning, and it held that kind of thrill to it. And now that I've been doing it for a long time and have made so many dear friends in the community, it feels more like I'm coming home.
I went on to ask Emily about her Appalachian studies.
I was really fortunate, I think, to land in that program, because what I was after was a little bit deeper understanding of what was different about the region and and some of the cultural aspects around the music, and not just fiddle tunes and songs and things like that, but like what happened around the music. Like, how did people travel? How did people like, what are the environmental and social concerns around the region and its resources and all the things. And so I ended up studying anthropology and religion and sociology. And I mean, obviously, because it was so many things, it was just a quick dip into each field with a specific lens on Appalachia. And so what else? Literature. I took a class in country music, and I did these independent study classes where I visited musicians. And specifically for that project, I visited with Clyde Davenport from Kentucky, lives in Tennessee now, and Benton Flippin, who is from Surrey County and is no longer with us, but was definitely a shaping force for me in my musical discovery. And with Chester McMillan, who's actually mostly a guitar player, and he lives in the Round Peak area and played with all of the people that you've heard of from Round Peak, Tommy Jarrell and Fred Cockram and Kyle Creed and all of those folks. And he really likes to sort of shepherd people in the music and mentor them a little bit. And he was so kind to me and just always willing to, play in a band at a fiddler's convention or back me up in a contest or just sit and play tunes. And it's like when you play with, he's a force of musically and rhythmically, and when you play with him, you kind of get like blown into a certain kind of rhythm, which is really thrilling. But also, he was steeped in the tradition for his whole life, and so you kind of get a sense of like the boundaries of what the regional styles were, and you hear stories about lots of people, and just hear about his experiences with music was just great.
As you heard at the top of the podcast, Emily was kind enough to play Fine Times in Our House. Here it is in full. I caught up with Travis Stuart, a banjo player from Canton, North Carolina. He told me a little about his background and how he got into playing the banjo.
There's just music all around, my parents, my grandmother, her dad played the fiddle. Great-grandma, I didn't never see him, but she would talk about him playing, and neighbors played. Neighbors on either side of us played. It seemed and there was music everywhere. Like a Saturday nights there was a dance hall. They had bluegrass and old time bluegrass bands and clogging teams and it's just every Friday and Saturday night that place would be. I could walk there. So there's just music everywhere. You could hear it all the time. Around.
And was there anything that kind of particularly inspired you to want to pick up the banjo?
Yeah, well, my dad worked at the paper mill, so there was a family there, the Smathers family, and they had a record out on June Apple Records, and it was all old time, because we grew up kind of hearing bluegrass all the time, Bill Monroe and Stanley Brothers. So he brought this record home. It's like, it's my buddy of mine, I work with, is some of his family or something, cousins, and they made this record called Sycamore Tea, which is it's all fiddle tunes, it's all old time, and they just lived maybe 7 or 8 miles away, and I never met them. So this kind of, and the fiddle player, there's 3 daughters in the band. There's like the father played guitar, and there was Elizabeth played fiddle, and then June played the banjo, and then another sister, I can't remember her name, played bass, and one of the bass players' husband played guitar. But the fiddle and banjo player were pretty young, so we were just kind of, wow, and so we were probably 13, they were probably like 21, 22, and so and it was the first time I really heard old time clawhammer, well, not really the first time I heard it, but the first time I kind of knew somebody that played it and seen them play and stuff. So from those guys, I really wanted to play after hearing that record and seeing them play. Smathers, yeah, I think they're going to reissue that record, June Apple Recordings, from Whitesburg, Kentucky. I think they reissued it, put it on, digitized the whole thing, and So hopefully it'll get out there. It's a great record. Well, the whole family, she's like 7 generations fiddle player. You know, I knew her dad played fiddle. I knew him and played guitar. Mostly he played guitar. I knew him, and then from there his dad played, and it's kind of documented all the way back. You know, like they all played fiddles. And, I started playing Scruggs style, 3-finger style.
Oh, right, okay.
Scruggs.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of all around. Nobody.
Yeah, as
really,
you said, bluegrass. So, I mean, you do then distinguish between bluegrass and old time. You see them as 2 distinct things, or do you?
Yeah. I mean, you can do. There's a lot of young bands using 3-finger. Foghorn use 3-finger, and a lot of that. So it's coming back where they have old time bands with 3-finger banjo, horse necks, and different bands playing 3-finger along with that. But that's why I really like that a lot, because you get the old time fiddle tune, but you get that behind the rolling kind of banjo. So it is a lot of the Flat and Scruggs, they play an old time tune because there was so many ways of playing the banjo, and there's so many old time bands before it came old time music. Now it's hillbilly music, the records, and some of the old 78s and stuff. And there's just no set way to do it. There's no really rules about playing. And I mean, the same thing we got over there. We got at home, we got people that's like, oh, this should be this, and this has to be this. And I was like, yeah, well, if everybody sounded the same, it wouldn't be no fun.
It wouldn't. No. So you started with 3-finger Scruggs. So I suppose did you then go on to do clawhammer and then come back to the finger picking, or? Yeah,
well, I always kind of finger picked a little bit, and so with the fiddle tunes, I would kind of finger pick it, anyway with the fiddle, because brother played a lot of fiddle, so he played, we always, so he kind of started out really just playing old time, with Elizabeth, and then I started out playing. Well, the banjo player, the sister wasn't teaching at the time, so I started playing Scruggs style, and then I met her, and she showed me a bunch of things that the call had. I just kind of played it from then on. Probably it was like 15 or something like that. What I like about it is those guys didn't listen to so and so, and they come up with their own style, and that's kind of some tunes that play like that where they're just banjo tunes, and they have little tricks and like that train sound and things like that, And hear the banjo other than playing with a fiddle or in a string band, just kind of.
Banjo and voice and so on.
Yeah. Just solo banjo stuff's really cool. All those older guys, they all tried to sound different. If one of them copied somebody else or something, they're like, oh, that's kind of like you're stealing personal property. Some of those guys were not. My brother and I played with this fiddle player named Red Wilson. He was a great old fiddle player. Recorded with Wade Maynard back in the early, the 40s, and. So we would go up to his house and learn tunes from him, and my brother would try to play just like him, So we'd come back next week, and Trevor was playing all his tunes, He's like, you're trying to copy me. Get your own style. Don't copy me, He was mad. He got mad and all those guys, they tried to be distinct, And I kind of need more of that. I think people need a little bit. I think people can develop their own style without feeling like it's not traditional. It's still traditional.
Yeah.
And those guys, we take Tommy Jarrell and Fred Cockrum and all those musicians. They all played the same repertoire, but they all sounded different, And that kind of makes it interesting, And it might not just be the melody notes. It might be like a rhythmic thing or phrasing a little bit. But it's pretty much the same notes. They all play the same notes, like a fly around Western country, that tune, if you listen to those 3 banjo players playing it, it's all a little bit different. Same notes, but just the way those notes are phrased and things is just so different,
Travis went on to play a tune for us. Wade Ward's Half Shaved in C with a low E 5th string.
Yeah, this is the most beautiful, beautiful style. And one thing about it too, like if you put any kind of embellishments or anything in it other than what he played it kind of ruins the tune. It's so simple. But this is that one half shaved. I think it's tuned to like C, double C, and he's got this tuned down to an E, I guess. So that's the E, a C with the E on top of the fifth. And that's the only tune you played out of that, really. You didn't play any other tunes.
Also, over from the States this year was Hilarie Burhans from Athens, Ohio. I caught up with Hilarie on a Saturday afternoon, and she told me a little about how she got into playing the banjo.
Well, it's also kind of a funny story. I was in high school in Athens, Ohio. I had lived all over the world growing up, but we had moved to Ohio, and I had a crush on a guy who was learning to play the fiddle, and I was scheming for some way to get to hang out with him, and it worked. And we've been married for, like 45 years or something. And he still plays the fiddle, so he also plays trombone now. He has a completely different sort of band, but anyway, we've still always played music together, so.
So the old time scene, I mean, is it something you've always been involved in, or?
Well, my dad was a jazz pianist, but when we moved I'd never lived anywhere more than 3 years in my whole life before I moved to Athens, Ohio, which is in the Appalachian part of Ohio. It's about 37 miles from West Virginia border. And I liked not just old-time music, but kind of everything that seemed to kind of go with it, which was just, living in a little cabin in the woods and cooking your food. And it was just all part of, and I was such a hippie, and it was just all part of that whole thing. I don't think that, I think that partly the fact that I'd moved so much growing up was why I put down such deep roots immediately when we moved to Ohio, but I really felt really connected, even though it wasn't where I was born or anything. There was one fiddler that we used to go in high school and when I was in college also, because I went to Ohio University, that we used to go out to see Ward Jarvis, who lived just near us in New England, Ohio, just a little community outside of the town we lived in. And those days were really, really special. The typical going out to see Ward, who was a fiddler, but who also played banjo, and a lot of people don't realize he played banjo. But it would be winter and snow on the ground, and he lived in this little house, this little sort of cabin, and had a wood heat stove in the middle of the room, just a pot-bellied stove, we call it. That would be, in my memory, it's like glowing red. I mean, it wasn't really, you'd have to open it to see it glowing red, but it was really radiating a lot of heat. And Ward himself was in his 80s at that time, and he would have on a full set of long, thermal underwear, and then flannel shirt, and then, overalls over that, and, and then another kind of flannel jackety thing over that. He must have always been cold or something, because we'd come over and be roasting and sweating, and he'd be, near the stove, and we'd have to urge him repeatedly to get out his fiddle. He'd always say, "No, let me hear you play," And so he would hear you play until I think he just got frustrated with how bad you were, And And then he'd finally, he had a lot of arthritis, but fortunately it was mostly in his bow hand more than in his fingering his left hand. But he had a pretty odd bow hold because of the arthritis. But and he also did play banjo. There were some tunes he showed me just on the banjo. He was very sweet. We learned tunes from him, and from each other. And we had other friends around town who played square dances and stuff. And when we were in high school, they were college age or higher. Some profs at the university that would get together and play, and we started being able to be invited to music gatherings at their houses and stuff. We went to festivals in Kentucky and West Virginia. We go to Glenville, West Virginia State Folk Festival. We go to Carter Caves and the Fraley Family Festival in Kentucky. And of course, when you're quite young, there's more to it than just the music.
Yeah.
There's the getting to camp. One odd camp memory that I have was we were camped right by Buddy Thomas, fiddler, amazing Kentucky fiddler, a very odd individual, and he was camped right by us, and it was drizzling rain when we went to bed at 2 a.m. or so into our tent, and they were sitting by this sort of spitting campfire, drinking whiskey. And it felt to me like the last thing we heard as we drifted off to sleep in our tent was this other guy, whoever it was, saying, "You're a fine human being, buddy. A fine human being." And then, of course, we fell asleep and everything. We woke up and it was still drizzly, and it's like 7 a.m. or 6:30 or something. And the first thing I heard when I woke up was, "A fine human being, buddy."
Oh my God. Many of us know Hilarie for her relaxed style of YouTube tutors. I asked her how she became such a YouTube success.
Well, so I've always given banjo lessons, just one-on-one banjo lessons. And since I don't do tablature, I don't know how to read tablature. I've deciphered a few things long ago and learned to play them and realized they're somehow set in stone in my brain. I can't change anything about those tunes. I'd have to pretend I don't know it and then play it. It'd be different. So I'm not very... it just didn't speak to me, tablature. So when I would teach, I taught the way I learned, which was not with tablature. And yet I wanted to be able to send my students home with something so that they could remember what we worked on together. And so I would always just have them here, hold my camera or my phone or whatever I was using at the time, and let me just do a little video. And so I do this video. I kind of developed this whole little language to remind them of what's supposed to happen when. Part of my growing up was in Pakistan, and my dad is a jazz pianist, and he had this sort of fusion band, and he had a tabla player. This tabla player was there a lot, and I was always struck by, now I'm blanking on what it's called.
What, like the language?
Yes,
sort of,
saying the beats, the tones.
Yeah.
And as a teaching tool. And I'm not saying that I ever had that consciously in my head, but looking back, I can see that there is some sort of a vague similarity there between me saying, bum diddy, drop them diddy, hammer diddy, bum bum.
Hilarie closed the interview by playing us a tune. Here she is introducing it.
This is a tune called Turkey Sag. That's by my friend Jim Childress, who some people know the tune The Road to Malvern. He wrote The Road to Malvern. Really close friend. We camp right next to each other at Clifftop every year. So this tune is just a D tune. It's called Turkey Sag. This is one of the few tunes I know of Jim's that is not named after a dragonfly. He has, categorized thousands of different dragonflies. He has a lot of tunes named for dragonflies. He's very into dragonflies. Yeah, I know, right? Not for a job, just it's what he's interested in. Of one fan clapping.
Finally, but not least, I caught up with Ivy and David Sheppard of the North Carolina Broadcasters on Sunday morning. They tell me a little about their background and their influences.
I guess I think I've always just been drawn to music. Even as a little kid, my grandfather had old Hank Williams records and Carter Family records, and I just liked the music. And there was always banjo and fiddle music around where I lived, and it wasn't until I was in high school that it occurred to me that maybe I could play an instrument. And I picked up a guitar one night, and somebody showed me how to play a D chord, and that was it. And I announced to my mother that night, I'm going to play music.
And so that was your intent, absolutely from the beginning?
I mean, truly from the first chord, I knew that, it just, everything lit up in me. And it was pretty easy access for hearing people play and learning from folks. And then I ran into the Roan Mountain Hilltoppers, the Birchfield family of Roan Mountain, and they really basically took me in. And so I just sit at the knees of Bill Birchfield for hour upon hour and play and learn as much as I possibly could.
I started just playing the guitar when I was young, and over the years, I've played various kinds of music, various kinds of acoustic music, and I had a sort of passing peripheral relationship with, I guess, with old time and bluegrass music, but didn't really get that deeply into it realistically until I met Ivy, which was I don't know, 12 or 15 years ago, and we got together specifically because at the time we were both interested in playing, wanted to find someone to play Carter Family tunes with specifically, and so that's what we did initially. And I had never really played any strictly speaking old-time music with anybody who knew how to play old-time music, and so I just kind of had my own taste of it, you know. But then getting together with Ivy, you know, led me more deeply into that world, which has turned out to be, I think, the music that has meant the most to me in my life and given me the most joy and satisfaction in playing, which is, you know, as I said, I've played lots of different kinds of music, and there are always various, you know, varying degrees of fun, but not ever anything that really seemed to speak to me in a deeper sort of way until I started playing this music. And I think it's just because of and if you heard us play last night, we sing a lot. We don't just play tunes, and the songs in this sort of tradition are so basic and simple and speak to universal conditions and stuff, and I find that extremely appealing. The different roads of musical experience that we have been down individually have sort of led us to kind of creating our own musical direction, which just comes, like anybody else, I guess, it comes out of your own personal musical experience. Mm-hmm. But then with the two of us getting together, it becomes maybe somehow those two things go together to create another new sort of thing. With Ivy's world of record collecting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I reckon, with the fiddle tunes, it's pretty much Hilltopper tunes, because that's just where I learned, and then obviously the Carter family influence. But with my record collecting, I'm pretty obsessed with finding obscure gospel stuff, particularly post-war, things that haven't been reissued. And so I'll find these records and then go, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this. And we'll listen to it. And then, as David said, we'll, make it be the way that we want it to be. I don't try to copy records. I don't try to play like the Birchfields, but that's just what's in my head. And it's the way that I hear and feel the tunes just from playing with them. But the idea of listening to, a Clark Kessinger tune or something like that, and for me, trying to play like Clark Kessinger doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's the difference between something being an academic exercise and something then being an artistic creation.
Yeah.
You can take something that already exists in this instance, a piece of music, or a Carter family song or a Clark Kessinger tune, and you can make it into your own tune that has its own artistic viability. Which to me is a lot more valid thing to do musically than to play I learned this note for note from Clark Kessinger, and here's how it goes. Well, okay, that's not very interesting, I think. That's already been done.
Ivy runs an internet radio station. She tells us a little about it.
Yeah, so I do a weekly show, a couple-hour show called Born in the Mountain, and it's sort of an exploration of music from the Appalachians, and so it's old time, some early bluegrass. I'll also get into a little country blues, and mostly from my 78 RPM record collection, and also field recordings, and just things that I don't think people will hear otherwise.
This brings us to the end of our first podcast. I do hope you've enjoyed it. My thanks to Tim Rook and the FOAOTMAD team for giving me access to the artists. My thanks also to the artists for their time and their warmth. My name is Ian Rattray, and until next time, farewell.
This is a song written by a fellow named Don Stover, a banjo player from West Virginia. Played with the Lilly Brothers quite a bit, and it's a song called Things in Life.